Hello, it's Marcus Catani here. I'm the Senior Lecturer and Unit Coordinator for the Risk Management Unit. In Module 4, Consultation and Communication, I've asked you to put together a short video to communicate your understanding of some of the features and definitions within Australian and International Standard 31000, and I thought I'd give a bit a go as well. Over the last 5 years I've put in place risk communication processes for a series of organisations, and I'd like to show you one of the ways in which I've done that. We start by talking to an organisation about a journey in time, because as you know, the international standard says that we have to reduce risk as low as reasonably practicable through a continuous improvement process. So we don't need to manage risk overnight down to an acceptable level. We've got to demonstrate that we can manage it from a high level to a low level, from a period of over a period of time. And in my little model I call this the past, and this is the future. So already you can see that we're not talking about definite dates or times. We're talking from a relative from the central column, which is time zero or today, into the future and past, and using a simple scale of risk from low to high. Now when an organisation wants to manage risk, the chances are that there is some reason that it wants to manage risk, and quite often that is because the risk is relatively high. And we call that event, or that decision to manage risk, a trigger event. We already know something about the organisation because simply identifying a trigger event indicates to us that the organisation has decided to change its behaviour. In other words, they no longer tolerate that level of risk. So we can show that the level of tolerated risk is below the trigger event. So the first action for the organisation is to understand what can they do in the next time period to reduce the level of risk from that level that caused the trigger to tolerated. And then over time we can help the company manage its level of risk to as low as reasonably practicable or acceptable level. So the aim of our work in risk management is to help organisations identify triggers, what are the contributing factors for that to help them move from tolerated risk down to acceptable risk. We can investigate incidents, as you know, in one of the previous modules, and identify a series of contributing factors. So in other words, we know what happens in an event, and we can identify contributing factors and the root causes. And in a way, each of those contributing factors for this trigger event accumulate, which follows if we put in place some actions to manage the risk of that event happening again, we can start to bring the level of risk down. And so on, as we manage the level of risk through various actions over a certain duration, we can see the level of risk comes down. And it may not be a smooth ride because of the variety of issues that we've discussed in the unit, but over time we can, through the continuous improvement process, we can manage risk to an acceptable level. Okay, I hope that helps you understand some of the terms that we've used. So there's a couple of interesting features about this graph now that we can use to help explain some of the partnerships that are required to manage risk. So referring back to the international standard, we can draw on some of the other indicators or definitions that we find useful. For example, we could draw on an inherent risk, which is the qualities of a process or equipment to cause harm or to increase risk. We can say that the inherent risk is higher than the trigger event in this case. And we can then say that if we're, say, at this point today, we can say that we've still got to remove this amount of risk. We've got to remove the area under the graph. That's our improvement opportunity. The amount of risk remaining in the organisation following the trigger event or concerned with this trigger event is the area under the graph. And in the standard, that's referred to as the residual risk, the amount we've got left to do. Now, the only way that we've managed to reduce the risk from this level above tolerated to the level today, which is at this level here, the residual risk, is by implementing a series of risk treatments which are in response to the investigations that we've conducted. Now, the only way that the risk treatments are going to be effective is if the people who are identifying the actions that are required to remove the risk are also talking and working in partnership with the people that have got to implement them. So we've got people below the line who are working to identify the contributing factors and the root causes and the actions, and then they're communicating with the people who are involved in implementing those things, and they're passing that level of risk from below the line to above the line. And so then we can say that the people who are involved in the area above the line are concerned with implementation and sustaining the level of risk. So there, the sustaining work happens above the line. But there needs to be a very effective partnership between the people who are working below the line, coming up with the ideas and the recommendations, with the people, the operational leadership teams who are working on the line to implement those. So there has to be a two-way communication, a partnership to manage all of this risk in a consistent way. And I find that's quite a useful way of describing the role of our health and safety and risk management practitioners and the relationship with the operational teams who actually own the level of risk on the line. Now, interestingly, we can do some other things with this as well, because we can say that if we understand the contributing factors and the actions that can prevent injuries, then maybe we can do something before the organisation has a trigger event. So, for example, in the module, I've said that we need to put in place leadership, systems and people. If we don't have leadership, systems and people in place, our level of risk may start to increase. So we can have a look at the effectiveness of our leadership, systems and people and try and predict what that's going to do regarding moving to a trigger event. So, for example, we want our level of risk to remain at this point. We're always moving towards our acceptable or our as low as a reasonably practicable level. But if we have an event, or we understand some of the levels of risk, or we haven't got certain things in place, we may see that our level of risk gradually increases, or we may perceive our level of risk as being well controlled, but in fact it's not, and so it's actually higher than it is, leading to an event. So we could say that some of this was because our contributing factors of leadership, systems and people weren't in place. And we can do some audits and cultural surveys and a review of the competence of our people and so on to help us understand what's the likely level of risk, then hoping to engage people in the program to reduce it before we get to a trigger event.